Amy, it's so great to get to this point. I think that we need to start with a breakout room for the committee,
Okay.
um, and then we will come back and join the group. Everyone's here, right? I think.
Okay, I will do that.
Or could have done on my own. There's just absolutely no way. Through my, heading back to school, getting my undergrad degree, getting the first master's, not being convincing enough in my PhD applications, and getting the second master's so that I could do the thing, and being admitted into a top ranked program at a wonderful, wonderful school. It is not something that I can take full credit for in any means. So many of the people that are here logged in, many that I know wish they could be here, or have already been sending me texts and messages. And thank you, Jeannie, for breakfast. She sent an edible bouquet of the fruits and stuff. And thank you to my aunt who sent flowers. It was perfect timing. I just got out of the shower for both of them. They were one right after another. But without the time and the energy and the kindness and the meals and the friendship, I would not be in this program, and I certainly wouldn't have made it through the PhD. And I am so very grateful to my friends and family. So it was important to me that I invite the people who have invested so much in me to be here for this. Even if it ends up with you ripping apart the dissertation, that is fine, because they will still see, what it is at this point, and what they're working on, and what their investment in me has come to. So I know it's a little unusual to have this many people at a defense, but I share this with all of them, so it was important. But all right, to the presentation part. I'm going to share my screen, and it's only a couple slides. This part's pretty short. The bulk of the time will go to the committee to discuss questions, etc. So let's get
Do you want to
started.
let Ian do any kind of introduction?
Oh, sure. And you have.
I would say let her rip. No,
Do the thing.
wonderful. It's wonderful to get to this point. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you have to say. My congratulations to you, and let's do it.
Okay. Well then, here we go. This is the one I want to share. All right. Everyone good? Can see that? Move that out of the way. Okay. The title that has been a collaborative effort, especially as chunks of the dissertation changed and needed to have something that actually represented what I was writing. Believe we have decided on emerging authorities in restoration theater, women's entry into self-representation. Arriving on the subject matter, deciding on what I was going to write about, started a while ago. Probably before the PhD started, possibly when the great Luann Vinden introduced restoration theater to me, and did a see, brain going, intensive assigned reading course with me, and then at La Sierra, working with Laura Gerges, she created a class for me for women writers in the late early modern period and into the Restoration. and allowed me to write my thesis for that on Margaret Roth. But I was already playing with Margaret Cavendish at that point. I think one of the best things about graduate school, particularly the PhD, is the flexibility of the subject matter in courses and what we can write about, what we're encouraged to write about. And knowing where I was wanting to go with my interests and my passions, I was able in a number of classes, I think there was 2 from Janet, to start creating what would turn into the dissertation. And I am grateful for that because it gave me early feedback and helped me, solidify a direction. I don't talk about Blazing World, mostly because it's a book and not a play. But Margaret Cavendish, also known as Mad Madge, played a huge role in my scholarship and plays a substantial role in the dissertation. Though Blazing World may be a book and not a play, I was absolutely excited for the opportunity and grateful to be able to work collaboratively with Annie Louie and create a performance piece based on Margaret Cavendish's life and the Blazing World. And it stuck with me. It was something that was important to me. And I particularly like this passage. Today, particularly, the memory is like the moon, hath its new, its full, and its wane. Because when I was writing these various things, there it was. It was in my brain and it was in the book surrounding me. And then it came to fruition. And now I'm really concerned that I'm going to be able to be coherent and remember anything that I have learned for the last decade plus. So the whole premise of my dissertation rests on the chaos and the change in the English, particularly London theaters, having to reinvent themselves after they were closed during the Commonwealth period. There was a fair amount of anti-theatrical feeling and association of theaters with sin and pretense and deception and inciting lust, and many well-written rants, pamphlets about the evils of the theater, particularly locking into or pulling in criticism of Catholic services and the pageantry and the performance and the trappings, the gold and the rich robes and so on and so forth. And these were then equated with the theaters, same thing in their mind. Put on a costume, put on a performance. So these are actually 2 of the ordinances that went out closing the theaters. And they were closed for just short of 20 years. When they came back, however, because 20 years, I'm just going to go with that, had passed, there was a lack of scripts. The two theaters, the Kingsmen and the Dukesmen, who were given permission to open theaters, were desperate to produce new scripts, partially because they were trying to revamp, Shakespeare and other popular plays of a generation previous. I feel like that's very similar to, say, watching Love Boat right now, which has been my background noise. It was a very, very popular show. It was in the top primetime spot. But now, watching it, however many years later, I could not watch it with it being anything other than a background noise. It is ridiculous. It's over dramatic. It's just trope after trope. It's sexist. It's a lot of things. I feel like if it didn't create a lot of those tropes, boy, did it lean on it. So reopening theaters and bringing forward scripts that were once very popular didn't hit audiences the way they wanted or hoped. This was also complicated because women were now allowed on the stage. Charles II was brought back from being raised on the continent and was determined, and I think politically savvy, to want to distinguish himself, his court, and the nation from who it was and what it was during the Commonwealth period. And so the pendulum swung, and London became much more libertine. There was a push to shock, to distinguish oneself from Puritan ideals. So flirtation and outrageous outfits and joking and just anything that would have been considered inappropriate, Londoners were now playing with, and at the encouragement and lead from Charles II. One of his mistresses, his favorite at that time, Nell Gwynn, sought to be an actress. She wanted to be on the stage, and among other pressures and things happening, also the idea of the inappropriateness of men playing women's roles. So kind of a swing on early modern of ideas of women being on stage and would be immodest, that they were out of where they were supposed to be. They were being seen and on display for far more people than they were supposed to be interacting with, to now it is inappropriate and offensive to have men playing women's roles, partially because Charles, growing up on the continent, was exposed to Italian and French and Spanish actresses. So coming back to England and seeing men attempting to play women's roles, which I say attempting because, again, 20 years-ish has passed. So instead of the building community of bringing in a young boy early on and teaching him how to act, the craft, to play the ingenue roles, the Juliets, the Violas, etc. And then, as he ages, playing more mature female roles. But again, with training and with an absolute fluency in the language of the theater, and by that I mean the poses, the movements, the intonations that helped audiences decode what was being communicated beyond just the words being said. So again, this process of bringing in younger boys, training them up, and now 20 years has passed, and there hasn't been any of this training, this apprenticeship. And so what few actors we have left as we get into the restoration that were adept and skilled at performing female roles are older. They are not in appearance what they were. All this comes together, and Charles II ends up declaring it illegal for men to play women's roles. This was both an opportunity, but a bit of a gauntlet for women. Many had not been trained to act. Many had not, many had not been in theaters because they'd been closed for much of their life. But quickly, the building body of actors started to include people that were adept at performing an identity, performing a role, such as Irish. A lot of Irish young women who had come over to the big city and had to learn to speak properly. You know, the RP, well, it wouldn't be RP because that was the wrong time period, but posh, to speak posh, and to have the right gestures, to have the right posture. They were a natural to, bring into the acting world. Because of the desperation for scripts, we have a tiny, tiny, itty bitty moment in which the majority of scripts and plays being produced in London are written by women. We have never come close to that again. But I write in this dissertation about the women involved in this shift and the parts that they played in taking advantage of opportunities that were presented or that they created. I mentioned Margaret Cavendish. I write about her writing, her plays, and her performance of her own self and her identity, and this creation of celebrityhood. Her first and many thereafter of her books, her pamphlets, she self-published, which worked fine actually, because there were plenty of hate readers of her things, and we have records of books being loaned to other women, and of people asking, have you read that yet? Even though publicly they're shunning, well, maybe not shunning because they followed her around, but negatively portraying her in conversation. But she is outrageous, and she is relentless, and her husband is also part of the theater world, and she takes advantage of this and creates spectacle. So much so that she caused traffic jams when she came into London. They would recognize her coach and horses, which were audacious. She had 3 sets of matching horses and a carriage that was black and dark blue with silver and gold stars on it. She was not avoiding the press or the people. I write about, in particular, one of her plays, Convent of Pleasure, and the claims that she's making within it, and the chastisements and the stand that she is taking boldly, writing from the continent in exile, however, not published until after the Restoration. I also write about Afra Ben, who many of us, that's the female author that gets put in the canon. Many of us maybe only learned about her as far as women writers. She was fantastic. She was amazing. She earned her living through doing translations for publishers from multiple languages and writing her own, novels. And she's credited with being a large part of the rise, the beginning of English novels. She is also part of the theater world and writes plays that don't necessarily combat or disagree with or in any way directly address issues that she sees in other plays of her era, but simply approaches them differently. I write about the rover, and within it, her female characters are given an agency. They are given, though through plot conflict, in which they're supposed to be doing other things. They're supposed to marry whomever, they're supposed to go to the convent. She gives them a voice, both on page and on stage, to plan their own futures, to scheme, to make some terrible decisions that gets them or nearly gets them in a lot of trouble, and traumatized. But it's a comedy, sort of, mostly. And so, everything ends well for most of the people. One of her female characters, the courtesan, we don't get a clear picture of a happy ending for her. Though she is one of the strongest characters and is in charge of her own life and chooses where she lives and when she goes into the public and who she chooses to spend time with, who she chooses to sleep with, and chooses her own sponsor. And she, as the woman with all of the agency, is the one left without a happy ending. I talk about that briefly. I spend a bit of time talking about the convent system in Europe and the influx of English Catholics when Henry VIII shut down and disbanded the monasteries and abbeys and the other Catholic holdings in England. At this time on the continent, particularly looking at Italy, France, including many of the English girls that had been sent over to be safe here. The convent system is rife with residents who are unlikely to become nuns. The convents have become places of protection, sanctuary, confinement, where I don't want to say unwanted, but unnecessary female relatives are sent. At this time, a dowry can be, and usually is, up to half of the father's estates. So you can't marry off basically more than one child. So everyone else, and all the other females, get sent to convents. They are spares. Cavendish talks about that in Convent of Pleasure, but she reimagines what a convent is and where the authority to have a convent comes from, as she creates a sanctuary for widows and women leaving abusive marriages and for young women not wanting to be forced into marriage to come and study and play around with the arts and be surrounded by nature and to garden and to live a wonderful life, free from men. The convent also comes along in The Rover in that one of the main female characters is promised to a convent that this is the plan for her life. She will not be the one getting any of the dowry family funds. So off she goes. Part of needing to confine all these spare women was the push for status, for social recognition, social climbing. You, as a family, would be shamed by any ill behavior of your spare females, your unmarried women, your aunties, your cousins, your sisters, whomever. So it was important to make sure that they were safe from scandal. They were locked away securely. But because of this secular population in these convents, they don't necessarily resemble what we picture for monasteries, convents, abbeys. And this is not all of them. Different sects of the religion have different levels of austerity. But for women entering one of the more lenient convent systems, the wealth that they brought in and the monthly allowance, stipend, rent, whatever, would allow the wealthy women to employ the poorer women. So they still had servants, so that they could pay others to do their expected service. So instead of, Lady Rich Pants going in, pruning the trees and being the one to clean the hallways, she's going to pay Miss Poor Pants to do extra work. They also, if wealthy enough, would have well-appointed chambers, paintings, comfortable bedding, toilet items. And these lenient convents, there was frequently a gathering room, the site of salons, a visitation area, that the women would be behind a partial wall, but would have a screen or something to separate them from the people coming to visit. And these gatherings and visitation hours are recorded as jovial and often were the site of matchmaking and seduction and flirtation, and at least once led to to women sneaking two men into the convent and trying to keep them hidden down in a basement so that they could have the life that they wanted, even if they were confined. That did not end well for anyone. Then I move on to talk about prologues and epilogues and paratext, which are also perhaps not new to the theater, but are a very different creature from the Renaissance epilogues and prologues. These are now expected. They are oh man, I've been all over the place and not paying any attention to what I have on the slides. I'm sorry. They are sent out. They are written anew for every production, because they are now referencing current events. They are reporting the court gossip and what's going on with the nobles, which is important to your everyday citizen, because these are the people that hold the power. And now that we're back in a monarchy, it's really important to know if there's something, some big scandal or kerfuffle that's on the horizon in court. They also spoke of military actions, commercial actions, trade in the South Sea, and referred to people directly in the audience. So of course they had to be updated. These prologues, sometimes before the production opened and frequently after it opened, were printed on broadsides, broadsheets, that were about the most accessible form of print, but also highly disposable. So we don't have much of the catalog that would have existed. We only have a tiny portion. But I liken these prologues specifically to, if you're familiar with Saturday Night Live's promo clips. So, you know, they'll pop up on, I don't know, whatever pop-up ad you have, or, you know, before another streaming show or something. They used to be in commercials, commercial breaks, that a couple of the cast members would be just kind of hanging out with a host or the musical guest, and they joke about what was coming for that show. And they tip off how awkward that host is going to be, or how flexible and fun and unashamed that host will be to play with the cast members on Saturday Night Live and make a fool of themselves. The prologues kind of gave that same feeling, that here's just a snippet of what's going to be happening, but isn't this great? Don't you want to see what goes with this? So we moved into, you know, the play after the prologue, and we get to an epilogue. The prologue was frequently performed by one of the cast, who would come out in their own person, maybe with something showing that they're about to be in character, but very much so speaking, you know, the scripted, but their own words, their own presentation, their own style, their own voice. The epilogues are a shedding of that identity, that they'll still have on some kind of piece of the costume to remind you of what you've just seen. And they then would comment on what you experienced, the plot, the characters, whatever, add some little platitude, relate it to contemporary life, just tie it in. With women being accepted as playwrights, they are creating the words that are going to be said on stage, though they may not be performing them themselves. Afra Ben particularly carefully chose who would present her prologues, whether it would be the, you know, the tragic lover, or the young maid, or whomever. She used the reputation, the aura, the celebrity of the presenting actor to add subtext to what was being presented. If it was one of the leading men who was known to be faithful, loyal, honorable, it lent credibility to her play. It lent authority to what was going to come. She she had been given permission by this actor, but speaking her words. And I make claims about this and mass media because literacy at this time is slowly shifting. We're moving from 90% illiteracy in the Renaissance in London for women, 70% for men, I believe. I should have added that. To 70% illiterate population Restoration, and then it just starts, increasing. The literacy starts increasing. But at this time, because we have so few sources of condensed and regularly updated news, the person at the edge of the stage who is interacting with the audience, joking with them, directing the prologue bits to the right people or to who it would be funny to deliver it to, is giving them the news. They're giving them the updates. This is where women speaking on stage are participating in the mass media of the time, and speaking with authority, because they are on that stage and they are addressing the audiences, and they're speaking with the authority of the playwright and their reputation and their celebrity in this world. Because theater was accessible, and because of low literacy rates, because of the spread of the broadsheets, that's the basis of my claims for mass media. Hi, Ian, you raised your hand?
Yeah, Amy, we should move to the question part of this.
Oh, sure. Okay, I covered that briefly. And then COVID happened, and I have an epilogue at the end of this dissertation, and I talk about and draw parallels between what happened in the entertainment world, particularly live theater, during pandemic lockdowns and afterwards, and connect that to what happened with restoration and bringing back theaters, and what did that mean and what was going to be the new normal. So that is going to be, or it is, I'm awfully fond of it, that my epilogue, because I don't know how I could not mention COVID and the world and theater changing events that happened while this dissertation was in progress. So, yeah, let's move on to questions.
Awesome, great. Do you want to stop sharing just so?
Oh, yeah, so sorry.
It's all right.
There. Hello, people's faces.
So, all right. So, would someone like to start?
I'm willing to jump in. I've done a lot of work with you, Amy, over the years.
Yeah.
And I was glad that your speech now mentioned Charles II having seen women acting out on the continent and bringing that back to England, because you don't mention that in the dissertation that you sent out.
No,
you talk about this new desire for realism, and that's there, but the other thing is the king decreeing it is obviously a major impact.
I wonder when I cut that part out and how I did.
So I have a couple of questions. One is a more local question, and one is a big question. You you obviously prefer having women play women's roles than men, and you talk about it as a progress of some kind. But I'm wondering, isn't because they're playing themselves, they're representing themselves, and politically we hear about self-representation versus other people representing you.
Mhm.
But isn't acting always about representing somebody else? I mean, the men who perform women are also Englishmen performing Turks and Spaniards. They're lower class men performing kings and aristocrats. It's not, that's what you do as an actor, right?
Right. I think one of the key differences and one of the things that makes that change important is because in the Renaissance, with men performing these women's roles, or any other role, as you mentioned, but particularly these women's roles, they are teaching society what the expected behavior is for these people. They are shaping the image of how women should look, should act, should flirt, should be quiet, whatever. I think racially that would be a good connection here of how many different times American media presented offensive stereotype of a Black person or an Indian person. And I'm thinking of Apu and the Abu, mixing it.
Although they also get Black actors to do that, right?
Yeah.
And there were plenty of women actors willing to perform what men wanted to see, surely.
Right. And I think that's where the change happens. I'm not making claims about proto-feminism. That would be outside of this dissertation's coverage. But because they are now in their own bodies, speaking words from male or female playwrights, they can perform gender of their choice. Yes, they're going to have to pull on what's expected, but they also can change the expectations of what women should be and how women should behave and act. And I think that is the empowering part of women getting the opportunities to speak publicly, and to be in their own bodies and to control the performance of gender, really. And I think that's part of the title, the emerging authorities, of they get to be the authority on what society is being taught.
All right. So I have another sort of large question. That is, you have these 3 separate chapters and you went through them in some detail talking about them. Is there some overarching thesis to this dissertation? Is there a, sort of one sentence claim that pulls this together and that you're making?
Yeah, that would have been a good thing. It's the emerging authority. It's the emergence of women into the acknowledged public sphere here. With Cavendish and her self-publishing and aggressive performance of her chosen identity, and Ben producing many plays, many that were very well received, and getting to create and represent and be an authority, because of the privilege of being put on the screen on the stage, and getting to choose who her actors were and who she'd specifically written parts for, and then moving into the prologues and epilogues and the roles of that's the edge of the stage, the liminal space between an actor acting and a performance of interiority, that they are letting the audience see the real them. They're joking with them, and this is them, the person. And I think that these opportunities played a very big part, played a very large part in women publicly having both a written voice and a performed voice.
Okay, maybe somebody else. I have other questions, but maybe somebody else would like to go.
Tony, go ahead.
So I'm going to start with making an overarching claim,
Okay.
which may or may not be true. But I'm intrigued by, as I look back on our notions of theater history, whatever they may be, to these times when theater closes. And there's a lot of them, there's the closing of theaters in Rome. There's the closing of theaters in England. There's the closing of theaters in the United States during the Revolutionary War, because they were seen to interfere with, more important issues. The overarching claim is that a lot of times the closing of theaters seems to be sort of saturated with the assumption that theaters are closing because they're decadent, they're irreputable, they're just really not very good for society in general. So they close. And then they reopen with a kind of, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes I think it shows in the Restoration, they reopen with a kind of funny combination of a heightened theatricality and a blindness to it. This certainly happens in the US when the theaters reopen after the Revolutionary War. You have plays like, Fashion and a lot of these other plays that deal with a sort of a heightened sense of theatricality, but also a blindness to it. So there's a kind of really weird sort of combination here that also seems to be, here's the other part of my overarching claim, that seems to be caught up oftentimes with a kind of authoritarian language as well. This is how we should behave. This is what it's good to do. This is what it means to be an American. This is what it means to be a good citizen. So when you reference the authority of the voice of women or the voice of anybody on the stage when they reopen, that authority can also be read as authoritarianism.
Yep.
And I think of where we are right now in terms of the rise of authoritarianism in the US. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that, the kind of the push-pull between an authoritative voice and authoritarian voice, especially when theaters reopen as the site of basically social ideology.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your thoughts on that?
I don't spend much time on that, but I do sort of mention in passing what's happening. You're absolutely spot on. The reopening, and again, particularly in the epilogues and prologues, are dedications, are statements of, the Whigs or the rebels were, they were dumb and they were bad and they didn't like fun and they ruined our lives, and long live Charles II, and under him we will have X, Y, and Z, and he is honorable and he keeps his word. And there's one, I think it was written by Dryden actually, where it's also like an underlying, and he pays his people. At the time he was in arrears and hadn't paid the people for their performances at court. Yes, absolutely. These sites of direct address, while not saying this is, well, there are some though that say this is how you should behave as an Englishman. or an English woman. You have to distinguish yourself from the French. And we get into that wave of French are silly fops, et cetera, and can't be taken seriously. And the variety of, I say racial stereotypes, but nationalism, perhaps. The Italians are this way, Spanish people are this way, French people are this way. And so we can't be any of those because those are all wrong for these reasons. So it's much more a authoritarian description of what not to be, more than seeing what you should be.
And it goes in a kind of insidiously darker place than that, if you will, because I think, again, it's been a long time since I've read these plays, so forgive me. And I read accompanying when I was a grad student, but no other female playwrights because they weren't available largely. Anyway, but I think of the line from The Man of Mode, right, Sir Fopling Flutter, where the rake says to his buddies in the tavern, they're asking him whether he wants to go to the theater to see not just the theater on stage, but also the theater in the audience, right? Who's hitting on who and who's coming with who and so forth. And he says this, the rake has this chilling, I can't remember the character's name right offhand, has this chilling phrase where he says, the deep play is now in private houses. And so it's like the theatrical consciousness, the consciousness of these roles to be played and to be played absolutely correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Is your cravat tied correctly? Are your gloves properly in fashion? Right? That the sort of the authoritarianism of social deportment is now so completely saturated culture and society that its primary stage is in the bedroom. And, and that's like really frightening. And it's also where we are right now.
Funny how that keeps coming around. Yeah, absolutely. The audiences were not necessarily there to see the plays. A lot of them were simply there to see and be seen, and it's a social gathering, and they're laughing and joking and eating oranges. There reaches a point, though, that Charles II actually puts out a decree, and it was one of the images, that people need to stop being rowdy. They need to get it together. That he sends out, it's directed to the nobles, and talks about the rowdiness of your men and the drunkenness and the inappropriateness, and that you need to strongly encourage them to behave better. It also talks at length about they have to pay. Make sure that your men pay for their theater tickets. And he declares at that point that everyone must have a ticket, but you can leave, and they'll give you that physical ticket so that you can come back. But once you pay and once you come in, that's it. You don't get to shout and holler and claim that you didn't like it and you want your money back. And it's interesting that he makes that a royal decree, which tells me that was an issue. That it had gotten to a point of a overlap of the bedroom and the theater. The sexuality on display. There we have a record of one play being stopped, and so the actor could tell the couple having sex in one of the boxes that they need to be quieter, because people couldn't hear the play. It makes sense that it would flow from perform bawdiness, perform anti or non-Puritan identities, show that you're English, you're not part of this group of that we just defeated. That once you start regulating that in the public space, of course it's going to bleed over into the private sphere and be used as a way of control and of intimidation.
Julie, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to lower my hand so I don't forget. First of all, congratulations, Amy, on finishing the dissertation. I'm going to start with this amid the pandemic and everything, all of the world-altering events that have happened. And I wanted to start by saying that I'm a last addition to this committee, but so it was my very first time sort of reading your prose, and I wanted to sort of start by saying that I really appreciated the sort of the direct, clear, moving, at times rousing quality of your writing, especially in those moments where you, in the epilogue, for example, where we really sense the stakes for you, and you share them with us. So I wanted to first sort of congratulate you on the quality of your writing, and then I have kind of a big comment and then a series of small questions, but I also want to say that I'm happy to share all of my comments at a later moment if you want. But so I'm not a specialist at all of this era. Like I have read Aphra Behn like many others, but this is really outside of my sphere of expertise. So when you take this project in the next phase or wherever you want to take it, I think it would be an interesting thing to think of folks like me who are going to read your book and sort of wonder, and you've done this in your presentation at the beginning of the Zoom call, sort of giving us the political context, the sort of historical context for us to sort of understand, this is what's happening at this moment. These are the political stakes. These are the changes that are happening. This is the circulation of bodies, royalty going to France and Spain, seeing other things, bringing that back, right? So not only in the moments in the past, but in the current moment as well, because this is a project that alternates between two moments in time that are quite distinct. And I think you're making connections between these two moments that can become even more fleshed out as you push the project in its next iteration, if that's what you choose to do. But I would sort of invite you to, and that is perhaps something you can do in your response to my question, to clarify certain terms that you use. For example, queering and unqueering. Those are, what is your working definition of those terms in the context of restoration drama? What does queering mean in that particular moment when queerness was not necessarily understood the way that it circulates today? So when you apply a term like queerness and Munoz, for example, to that moment, what are the distinctions or the complexities that you have to give us as readers to follow your argument? So that's my first question. And then the second question has to do with, I was super intrigued by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and partly because I have a huge artistic crush on her, but also because I was like, yes, the SNL prologue, yes, absolutely. But also in Fleabag, the constant use of aside and directly to the audience. I was like, I was waiting for you to make that connection between what these playwrights are doing and what Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who is a theater person, before it became a series, it was a play. This very real negotiation, this space of negotiation that is the aside, the prologue, the epilogue, the peritext that happens in Fleabag. So to me, there is like something there that is just begging for more, like going at it. So
excellent point. I will add that in.
But maybe if you can start by just sort of engaging a bit more with what you understand queering, unqueering to be. You mentioned it in the chapter, but I would like to hear more. And then, the suggestion for Phoebe Waller-Bridge is purely out of my desire to read what you have to say about this. So I will stop here.
I just got all excited about writing that, which I'll have to do fairly quickly because I got to get this turned in next week.
Oh yeah, it doesn't have to be in this
Oh, no,
iteration.
no, that needs to be in there. I cannot believe that I did not mention her breaking the fourth wall and the direct interaction, which obviously, yes. All right. So the queering and unqueering. In one of the chapters when I'm talking about the shift from, as I said, the male actors being trained to portray a gender that they don't personally identify with. And I talk about that as queering the stage, that they are taking on an identity, they are performing an identity, I need to stop hitting the mic, sorry, performing a gender that is not their own, but are doing it in acceptable and at the time convincing acting, convincing portrayals, that this is, for this moment on this stage, the identity that this person has taken on, before leaving that space and returning to their own identity, their own performance of the gender that, you know, they the most identify with. So I talk a bit about that. And like I said, I refer to that part as the queering of the stage. So when I shift forward to women being on stage, that is what I'm referring to as unqueering. It's the same polemics for the morality of appropriate gender performance. Basically, that had argued that men, like I said, that men should be the only ones in the public sphere, especially in that way, for consumption of the spectacle that they're presenting. But then we come back the other direction, and there's the again the morality, the protect, you know, our maybe not protect the children. There aren't a lot of children attending theater, but you know, protect our women and whomever, everyone's morals, and put women on stage, because men playing women creates lust and unnatural lust. So a lot of the reasons, other than, you know, Charles wanted it, are recorded as being to, in different words, unqueer the stage.
So just so that so this return to sort of like what I think I understand as a binary division, right? So women play women, men play men, right? So that's what you qualify the unqueering.
Yeah.
So I guess my invitation in when you sort of think about the what happens before in the queering phase of that you describe is it binaristic, right? So is it that men who play women are not also existing along a spectrum of identification or disidentification? Like, is it, what I think I was reading, and that was at times kind of calling for a bit more complexity, is we don't know for sure if some of the men who played those roles identified as male or identified as, we don't, that whole spectrum is present, right? Yep. So if you're arguing, as I think you are, that in this queering phase of the stage, there is this ambiguity, this non-binary kind of, even though it is in the service of a certain patriarchal hegemony, can you say more about this? Can you say more about these sort of like entanglements with gender that are perhaps a bit more complex than just men playing women and that's just the performance that is an imitation? Is there something else that's happening as well?
We do get a bit of a shift, things like with Moll Flanders, Roaring Girl, of challenging gender performance, but the response is consistently that that's unnatural. That's a novelty. That is, you know, that's a bear on its hind legs. That's not well recorded a normalcy. And I have a positioning statement that I don't know where to put, if it should be in the introduction or first chapter, and just show that what I'm referring to. When I talk about women, when I talk about men, I am referring to what identity they are publicly presenting, exactly because we don't have records of, you know, who had what outward markers of biological sex. We have simplistic identities of gender, generally speaking. So when I'm talking about women or a woman, I am referring to a person who is performing and identifies as and is accepted as that gender, of whatever womanhood means at that place and time. I certainly am not claiming that we don't have, you know, transsexuals or non-binary people, or other identities outside of the binary. I suspect it won't be long as we're recovering and digitizing a lot more of these primary sources and broadsheets that we find tucked into books, or, you know, stuck in bathroom outhouse walls or whatever. I suspect that there will be progress, there will be challenges to that binary, and we'll find out more, probably through, you know, what's unsaid. But we're in a really exciting place right now in this field with what's being digitized and made accessible to scholars and academics. And I've been excited to see what happens, because even from starting this till, you know, last week, more things, UCSB, Santa Barbara has an entire program of digitizing these primary texts, and the Huntington Library, every time someone uses one of their texts, they honor a waiting period so that they're not giving away, you know, someone's research, and then they make it publicly available. And that's a very similar thing that's been happening in libraries in England and other parts of the world. So yeah, I suspect that as we start getting that correspondence and things like that, that this can be a much more involved and nuanced conversation, instead of just having to deal with presented binaries.
I don't want to jump. I don't want to step on Jane, but I do just want to insert her really quickly that I think it's really important that you also look at the role of the fop when you're talking about querying. I mean, it's there. I mean, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw that out. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually thought about that, but it was leading me, I don't want to say down a rabbit hole, but I don't think that I can honor making that connection without talking about the performance of nationality, of national identity, and addressing what mannerisms, what stereotypes fops were accused of, or were actually polling on, and, you know, the role that they play in a play, what it says about this type of performance and this identity, and what they the playwright and the actors are saying about that performance of foppishness.
Jane, go ahead, please.
Okay, I need to, sorry, I'm gonna also put my hand down while I'm still thinking about it. Yeah, Amy, so first of all, just to say that the question that I'm asking ultimately is simply, what difference does print culture make? So having said that, I'm coming into this very much as a literary person who really, derived a lot of, I found a lot in those parts of your dissertation that sort of took me toward performance history, because I tend to, focus obviously on all of this material as a literary text. And I loved everything that you did with regard to just even, what it means to look at a face as opposed to look at feet, or, the shifts around the sort of periphery of the stage with the emergence of the sort of restoration theater, which whose transformations, back to Tony's point earlier about deep play moving into the house, are so parallel to the ones within domestic space in the period, in terms of incorporating transitional spaces into that design and, reorienting points of view. And it's a really, really interesting and fruitful parallel. And of course, the novel is the domestic genre, right? And there's a fascinating sort of interaction, especially around women and women readers, between what is happening in the history of the literary versus what's happening in the history of the theater. And you're focusing on this moment where they really overlap, I think, in really interesting ways. So I really like that. I definitely wanted there to be more about that. I also, and that's ultimately where my question is going to go. I did also want to agree with Julie, though, that I appreciated so much the directness of your voice here, and, reading your coda, which I admit I could only read quickly, the sense of passion that comes through there, and the sense of, where at this present moment you want this maybe to be headed, and your sort of courage to do this in time, in history, at a moment of change where you're writing about change in really profound ways. So I appreciated that, and the kind of difficulty of that quite a lot. But back to the print thing. So yeah, so it just strikes me, because I do feel like the thrust here is very much to bring that moment, right? The late 17th century, basically, and these women, but that moment in particular, into relation to ours. That's very clear. And it does strike me, first of all, those women were so much writers as well as readers. I mean, it was so concerned in the frontispiece to her writing to circulate the image of herself as a writer whose theater is in the mind, right? And that sense of privacy and private consumption that it, Ben also, wants her plays even, and certainly her fiction, to move into that space, into domestic space. And the idea that the woman reader, right, in particular, is who you're after much more than the person in the audience, how you negotiate that. So it strikes me one way of kind of bringing these two moments together, and what's different, what changes, and obviously many, many, many things do, but these women are writing at the beginning of the print revolution. They're writing on the brink of the novel. And what is happening now is on the other end of the print, right? Like, we're beyond it now. We're moving past it, right? We have moved past it, right? And so these are these two liminal moments, right, within that particular history, which is the history of the literary medium. So I wonder if you have thoughts about, just how you might possibly use that in maybe, integrating a little bit more the different moments and phases of your dissertation over time. What difference does print culture make within some of these questions of authority, self-presentation? How do you know that someone's presenting who she really is, either on the page or on the stage? I mean, that's a peripheral question, but I think it really is relevant. And we were talking about the asides in Fleabag, right? And I was noticing or remembering the most ingenious of all of them is the one where she's doing the aside, and the priest actually hears her doing the aside.
Yeah.
And it's like a double frame break, right? And that strikes me as incredibly novelistic, right? That you couldn't actually have come up with that before you have some of the perspectival techniques that are going on in the domesticated space of the novel, right?
Yeah.
So I just think that's an intervening moment, right? That's being anticipated and worked out by your, and Cavendish and Ben in particular, but it's coming back later. So I know it's kind of a diffuse question, but maybe if you could just, at least within what you did in the dissertation, articulate, just how you're thinking about that relationship between the stage and the page in terms of their affordances for women, female identified bodies, right? Identities, right? In the ways that you're thinking about it. So that's my question. I also had a really specific one about Mary Picks and Ibrahim, and I don't know if we would get to that or not, but I will reserve that and just listen to what you have to say in a more summational way about just the role of the literary in these and print in particular in these transformations that you're charting.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind, well, obviously is Afra Ben, who is working both in literature, books, translations that she's doing, which I do want to note, translations are a different way of expressing one's voice because there are many, many options when you're translating of what words you choose and how you translate a sentence and the selection of connotations and denotations. I mean, obviously, her work with the print culture is very much so what allowed her to be involved with the theater culture. Playwrights for a big chunk of this, probably again after Charles II's declaration of not being rowdy and paying. There was a third night rule that the takings, the tickets sold on the third night is what the playwright got paid. So for Afra Ben to be attempting or to be entering the theatrical world was a gamble without other support, without name recognition, really. The societal awareness and association of her writing as being entertaining, as being relatable. This seems like a jump, but I promise it's connected. Because we have, again, love in the records. We have records particularly of wills describing inheritances and how many books and which books a person had, and then bequeathing books to others, and particularly women doing this, which I attended a presentation talking about making claims about the prevalence of these books in the domestic life of women, the private discussions and reading groups and whatever, that this is evidence of that culture. We do have, that growing literacy rate. And I think, again, particularly both for Cavendish and for Ben, their works outside of the theatrical, their literary works are PR. I mean, obviously that's not why they were written, but they're serving to bring visibility. They're serving to create fans, people that want to see what she's doing, what she wrote, read her books. And in that case, I'm talking both about Ben and Cavendish, I realize. Cavendish prolifically sending literature out into the world. Some really, really great stuff too. And Ben perhaps less prolifically, but on a more socially accepted scale of that she was able to have printers make contracts with her to print X amount of her books because they believed they would sell, or they did sell. This change in time and this upheaval is much like we had with COVID, and I talk about that a bit, is creating empty spaces, is creating a shift in how people are spending their time, where they're spending their time, what they're doing for entertainment. Because again, this 20-ish years, very, very different culture than when Charlie comes back. And I think a big part of the success of women being given the opportunity to have that authority of performance comes from the spread and the sharing and the public presentation at this time of women writers, and moving towards the novel and normalizing and giving permission to read and enjoy fiction. That it doesn't have to be simply a moral tale or biblically related, but it's become acceptable for women to read these authors, and the female authors do a very good job of apologizing for writing, apologizing for having skill in their dedicatory materials in the beginnings of books, and the prologues and epilogues as written for publication, which were different than those that were written for each production. They weren't as topical as far as current events. They were more broadly focused, more general in who they were aimed at. But yeah, I think it's absolutely to the credit of literary culture, and of the women willing to put themselves out there in their writing, knowing the abuse they would receive for doing it, and yet continuing to do so. That I think that very much so was an important part of the opportunity seized by women in that period.
We are getting close to time, but does anyone have additional questions for Amy? All right. Well, I think then that the committee should again move into a breakout room, and then we will return.
Okay. Ian, do y'all want a moment with Amy or just the committee?
Just the committee. Yeah.
Okay. That'll be 50 seconds.
Can you come and do all of our dissertation? You're so
She did it for me. She just kind of took over managing everything around my life while I was finishing mine. So this is the least I can do.
That's really beautiful. Well done, both of you.
Yeah.
Folks are slowly reappearing.
Yep. I can hear her upstairs like talking, so we may have to wait for the full closure. And here should be everybody. And looks like Amy is back.
All right. Well, congratulations, Dr. Shine. Very, very nice moment here. We were all really impressed by the discussion today, and the committee praised the strong voice of your work and the clarity and sort of immediacy of everything that you're doing here. And the discussion today was excellent as well. You know, I'll talk to you privately about some things that you might look at over the next week before you have to turn in the final document. But we were all in agreement that, you know, that this is a successful dissertation and a successful defense. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.